Then it says, Abraham begot Isaac, and Isaac begot Jacob, and Jacob begot Judah and his brothers. Now, Judah's a really interesting one we'll see in a moment. It says here, Judah begot Perez and Zerah by Tamar. Does anybody know the story of Tamar? Who knows the story of Tamar? Well, Tamar was not Judah's wife, all right? He had 2 children with Tamar, but she was not actually his wife. She was actually his daughter-in-law. Yeah, she was his daughter-in-law. It's a pretty shocking story. If you read Genesis chapter 38, we won't go into it. If you read Genesis 38, there's a story there where Judah he's got 3 sons. In fact, we can just go there. Genesis 38. I won't read it out, I'll just reference things. Genesis 38, when you look at verses 2 to 5, you see that Judah had 3 children. The first son he called the second one he called Onan, and the third one he called Shelah. Not a good name if he was an Australian for a son, but but they're the 3 sons, right? And so he took Tamar for his firstborn son's wife, to be his firstborn son's wife. But unfortunately, the Bible tells us, as you keep reading here, that was a wicked man and God killed him, right? So then, according to the custom of the day, the idea was, as you keep reading Genesis 38, that the tradition was that you would then give that wife of the firstborn to the next child, to the next son of Judah. And so Judah did that. He was faithful with that. He allowed her to marry his second son. But unfortunately, he was an evil man, and you'll have to read the details. There's a bit of detail there we probably won't bring up right now. But there's a bit of detail there. He was an evil man, and God killed him too. And Judah got a bit worried. Judah started to think, well, you know, this woman's married 2 of my sons, and both of them have died. I've got 1 left. And, you know, for men, having a son back then was a big deal. If you don't have children, you've got no heir, you've got nobody to, you know, look after you when you're older, you know, like you need children. It was a big deal. You need especially male children back then, right? So he didn't want to give. He said to her, look, I'll give you my son later when he's a bit older, you know. But Tamar could see that she wasn't going to be able to marry this 3rd son. And so she actually dressed as a prostitute, masked her face, and Judah went and slept with her and had children with her. And there's a whole story there. And out of that relationship came 2 children, and they are the 2 mentioned in the genealogy of Matthew, if we go back to Matthew. And there's a purpose, I think, to including this. It's not just facts for the sake of facts. There's actually a purpose for including this, and we'll talk about that as we go through a few more. But it says, Judah begot Perez and Zerah by Tamar. They were 2 of these children. Now, what's interesting as well is that all of the, you know the term Jew, right? The term Jew refers mostly to the descendants of Judah, right? To the southern kingdom. And in the southern kingdom, you had the descendants of Judah and Benjamin, and you had perhaps some Levites as well and things like that. But the term Jew refers to that kind of grouping of people. And most of the descendants of Judah come from these 3. So a great deal of Jews actually are descended from this particular incestuous relationship, which is really quite fascinating when you think about it. But then it goes on and it says, Judah begot Perez and Zerah by Tamar. Perez begot Hezron, and Hezron begot Ram. Ram begot Aminadab. Aminadab begot Nahshon, and Nahshon begot Salmon, and Salmon begot Boaz by Rahab. Now we know the story of Rahab, right? Rahab, how many of you know the story of Rahab, right? We know, not many. Okay, Rahab was a prostitute who was in the city of Jericho, and she helped the spies of the Israelite spies escape from the city of Jericho. And in return, when the Israelites took the city of Jericho, they spared her and her family and anybody that they could bring into, that she was able to bring into her house. And she was absorbed into the people of Israel. So she joined the people of Israel, and she was the mother of Boaz. And that could explain why, you know, the story of Ruth. How many people know the story of Ruth? few people know the story of Ruth, right? So that could explain why Boaz was so sympathetic towards Ruth as a foreigner, because her own mother was a foreigner, right? So she was sympathetic to her. And Ruth is another really interesting story, because although Ruth was a very godly woman, Ruth was a Moabitess. Does anybody know where the Moabites come from? Nobody knows where the Moabites come from. This is another story in the Old Testament. If you go to, I think it's Genesis, you know the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, right? Who knows the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, right? Story of Sodom and Gomorrah. God destroys the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah, rains down hail and brimstone upon those cities, and Lot and his wife and children escape. His two daughters and his wife escape. His wife looked back, and because she looked back, she was turned into a pillar of salt. And, you know, all that remained from the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah was Lot and his two daughters. And when you read the story in the book of Genesis, these three people thought that they were the last human beings on earth. They thought that that was it. They thought Judgment Day had come. Everyone was destroyed. They were the only ones left. And so they both got their father Lot drunk and slept with him. And as a result, you had the Moabites. One of them came, you know, the Moabites all come from one of those children. So you can see in this genealogy that there's a lot of sin. There's a lot of sin in this genealogy. And what it does is it shows us the grace and mercy and compassion of God towards humanity. That he would come and be descended through these sinful human beings. That he would love humanity. Sometimes we have this idea that, you know, God is so, you know, holy that, you know, he would never lower himself, you know, especially when you talk to Muslims. He would never lower himself to become a human being and to live amongst such filth. But our God is so great that he's willing to come down and to be born as a human being through sinful people like this. He loves us so much. And it's a really interesting thing when we think about our sin and we think God can never forgive me. God can never forgive me for my sin. One of the things we have to realize is that God loved us so much that not only did he come and allow himself to be born through a sinful genealogy like this, but he came and lived among sinners for 33 years, and then he died, 30 years, and then died on the cross, 33 years, and then he died on the cross for our sins, was buried and rose again, and he now lives in heaven to intercede for us, you know, with his blood, because he shed his blood for us.